what brought you here is FAFSA data, but we heard a lot about this. This is bigger than FAFSA. And what I think I'm going to hit on here is that this is bigger than just data as well. There's no one magic data point, but it's more about how you think about it and how you use it and what you do with it that's really going to make that impact on your students. So I'm going to start with just generally, I like to start with this because Marcia made a comment about, are we going to be introduced as the data geeks? And we weren't, but we are. So this gets me excited to start by talking about the power of data because you can do so much with it. So one, you can examine trends to see what's working, really drill down to student groups, and not just know what your FAFSA completion is, not just know what your college enrollment is, but figure out who those kids are that are struggling, who those kids are that could be doing better than they're doing now, and figure out how to serve them and how to get them the supports they need. Develop strategies for continuously improving. Prove your program's work. There was a couple of questions this morning about what do you do in times when there are budget cuts and there's reductions in staff. What you do is you do the best you can to show that your programs are working, and the number one way to do that is to show your outcomes. And then you can stop doing what isn't working. Also, another way to get good funding, to have people believe that what you're doing is right, is when you see something's not working, you stop, you reassess, and you move forward with something else. And ultimately, while I think all of us are here in the room, is to ensure that what we are doing is helping our students to be successful in the end. So this is my opinion on the old approach of how people use data. Make the data available, hope that people in the field will use it, and at the end, we're going to pray that the fact that the data is out there means that it's going to change what we're doing, and it's going to change what impacts students. What results is, while the data exists, it's not really focused on the people using it, and it's out there, but the users really aren't clear on what to do with it. What's been happening over the last several years, and you'll hear more about this as you get to hear from the sites that worked with FAFSA data in the last year, and as you get into this fabulous toolkit here of what other groups have done, you'll start to see how this better approach is working. It's about putting out data that's focused on the user, that's focused on the student and their needs, making sure it's timely and targeted to student needs, and it's clearly connecting the data to an action. So it's less about putting the data out there and hoping somebody picks it up and uses it, but really having conversations. We heard a lot this morning about conversations. Really having conversations between the data folks and the people who are on the ground, who are in the schools, who are making the administrative decisions, and talking about what that data means, what do we need to know, how do we use it, in this continuous cycle of planning and communication to get it out. My opinion, from my experience, and I did come out of Chicago, so you'll hear a lot of Chicago examples, is that that's really where you get impact. We've seen it in Chicago, we've seen it in actually several of the sites here in the last couple of years, we've seen it in other districts, and you really need to focus on not just putting data out there and figuring out how you really spam counselors and teachers and principals, but what it is that they need to know, how are they going to use it, and help them do better. Data's not meant to be overwhelming. I get really excited about it, so I can get deep into numbers and think it's the coolest thing ever. But I understand that's overwhelming, and it's not meant to be overwhelming. It's meant to be a use of better planning, but putting systems in place, and in the end, really making life easier. It's about better targeting resources and better targeting your efforts. And while you're probably spending 18-hour days serving students, it's about better using those 18 hours and maybe getting a little nap in there somewhere. So key things to remember: in order to better effectively use data, you can't measure just to measure. You can't just put the data out there. You have to identify what's important and stay focused on those elements. There's a lot of possibilities of what you can measure as you're thinking about college access and you're thinking about how FAFSA relates to the bigger picture, and I'll go through some of that. But you can't do it all. You have to start somewhere, figure out what's important to you now, and if employment data isn't something that you can do something about right now, let's just put it to the side and focus on FAFSA, focus on college enrollment, focus on college access. You have to make sure you embrace what the data says so that we're not just reporting it and finding ways to explain it away, but that we're actually diving into it, digging deep, and figuring out what it says and how we can get better. Clearly tie data to solutions. I think it's probably the most important point I make every conversation I can. There's no point in putting it out there if you're not going to do something about it. But you can't put it out there and assume people know what to do about it either. So you have to help, you have to have those conversations. You have to talk to the people on the ground. You have to say, what does this mean to you? You'll hear, actually we heard this morning, with the FAFSA example, you can probably guess the 3 reasons why people aren't completing their FAFSA, but we really need to figure that out in the way we present the data and how we highlight it and how we flag it and how we disaggregate it to really help people understand if you see this, then you do A, B, C. And that's where you're going to see your outcomes. Have the right people in the conversation and measure early and often. There's nothing more frustrating than to find out 2 years later what you did a year ago didn't work. And that doesn't really work for our students either. So that's actually why FAFSA is, while it's not the magic bullet of data, is very exciting because, as you all know, or I guess you'll know on January 15th, it's now and it's every day. And we get to know what happens as a result of our efforts. And if our numbers aren't going up, then we know what to do to make them happen. And then always be thinking about the next step so that if your goal is 80% and you reach 80%, you don't stop, but you figure out where to go. Chicago started FAFSA tracking, I think it was in 2008, and that's really sad that I don't know because the last 6 years were kind of a blur. But they are now at 91% FAFSA completion, which is, I think, beyond what anybody ever kind of thought would happen when we first started it. The percentages jumped 10% a year in the first 3 years. And at 91%, they're not stopping. It's not just, okay, people do FAFSA. It's now figuring out who are that 9%, what do they need. Of those who have completed the FAFSA and didn't go to college, why? Is really diving down further and creating new benchmarks, new goals to reach out for. So I talked about the bigger picture. It's not just one data point. I like to use this very colorful slide just to help people wake up a little bit. But also just, it's a spectrum, and there's a lot to dive into. So wherever you kind of find yourself on the spectrum, I think everyone in here are probably secondary districts, but you're working with college partners. I heard people say they're working with chambers of commerce. It's the connection to college, it's connection to any sort of post-secondary institution, to employment, but also thinking about, if we're talking about college access, we're talking about more than FAFSA, what is happening with those students before they get to you guys. It's a spectrum, and there's lots of ways to go and lots of supports to think about. And it's about connecting it to a bigger picture within your district or within your school as well. And I'm not going to go through this. This is actually what we did in Chicago when I was there, and Greg and Joyce and Regina and Sean were there. It's not the answer. It's an answer. There was a framework within which all of the data worked. I was a research director. I didn't just spit data out. I talked to the people in each one of these columns to say, what are we trying to achieve? What do you need to know? This is what we have. How do we marry it and get the data out? What are we missing? What do we go out and find? You need to have that in order to really have your data make sense and help your district or your school or your whatever your objective is. So I'm going to actually take a side step here and talk through some of the different data elements that are out there. I know you guys came here very focused, I think, on FAFSA, but I want to broaden the concepts of what's out there and how you can start, once you get into it and you're ready to focus on more than FAFSA, what are those opportunities out there that you could start and analyzing your FAFSA with. So the first is simply your student transcript data or your program data. So looking at FAFSA data by students in GPA, ACT scores, what programs they're participating in. That's both a good way to see how programs are effectively reaching your students, but also using that as a dissemination vehicle. So if you have Gear Up, if you have a 4-H club, if you have like Senior Scholars Program, whatever it is, those are the touch points where you can think about better ways to be interacting with students and pushing that data out to the people who are with them regularly. A senior exit questionnaire is just an example. It could be lots of different survey opportunities, but really getting to know what those aspirations are of your students, what their plans are, and specifically diving into what they're thinking about for senior exit questionnaire, what they're thinking about after high school graduation, what are their next steps, and what did they do to get to that point. So again, the Chicago example, but we asked really detailed questions about their application process, about their scholarship application process. So when we did the analysis later, we knew these 5 elements plus FAFSA, without FAFSA, various configurations of students to be able to know what was effective and what their outcomes were. But certainly that could be done at any point. We've talked to a number of districts who are thinking about doing this to measure aspirations, like starting in the transition to 9th grade, really getting a sense of where students are across points in time. Certainly very valuable. College enrollment data. How many people here get clearinghouse data? I assumed it would be the whole room. Okay. Certainly, you can think about FAFSA in comparison to college enrollment data. It's not about, I mean, we heard this morning, and you all know, completing the FAFSA is about helping kids get into college. We then need to know, did they get into college, and was that part of the process that helped? And not just getting in, but also persisting. The IPEDS data and Barron's ratings are just data sources. There are actually plenty of others that give you context about post-secondary institutions. So more than just their 2-year, 4-year, but IPEDS data, and I may be corrected by the folks sitting here, but IPEDS data includes information about lending from the institution, the percent of recipients, or percent of Pell recipients at an institution. There is a ton of information about the universities and institutions out there, so you can know more than just did my students go to college, did they go to these colleges, but were they successful, and then what are the characteristics of those universities, and how do we better target students to get to those? Employment data, it is hard, but it is possible to actually find out where, if your students were employed and in what industry. FAFSA data, which you are all very familiar with. A freshman survey, I actually talked about that already. And career exploration data, which is a big bucket. It's actually kind of can be combined with college prep data as well. What are students doing between 9th grade and 11th grade? We have a lot of data around senior year. We have a lot of data about what happens available to us about what happens after high school. But really to dig into the picture, we need to know, are they exploring careers in 9th grade? Or in 10th grade, are they figuring out what that means for going to college? Are they attaching that to their plan of what courses do I need now to get to what degree I want? If they want to go into law, are they having the right course? If they want to go into medicine, are they actually taking science when they're in 9th grade and not waiting until they're in 11th grade? I had an unfortunate experience recently where I have a niece who is a senior in high school, and I've been trying to be helpful to my sister and to her, and not be pushy, but be like, I know what's going on here, I need to give them support. And we just found out that she actually did not take a foreign language. It turns out the school she wants to go to requires a year of foreign language. And I thought, oh my gosh, that was such a misstep on my part, because in 9th grade, I didn't sit down with her. Her mom didn't sit down with her. Certainly, her counselor who didn't say, do you want to go to liberal arts? What do you want to do? She didn't even know what liberal arts was till last year. But that's really, we're getting into the question of where are students going and why are they going there? We have to dive back to 9th grade, we have to about 8th grade, 7th grade, probably even earlier. And this is a big bucket, so I have the and more. So getting back to how to use the data, thinking about FAFSA data connected to this big picture. I'm going to go through a really simple example of kind of pulling it back. This is a little backwards and actually, because you guys are starting with FAFSA and probably going up and thinking bigger, but I think the example still works. So the first idea is that we're all here to get students into college and or post-secondary institutions. I do make the mistake of saying college for everything, even though that trade certificate, all that is college in this example. So if you think about we want to increase our college by 2.5%, how do we get there? We know we can't just tell all of our counselors, okay, increase college enrollment by 2.5%. So in Chicago, what we did was we reported this annually, but we knew we needed to go further. So we started to try to pull that back into something a step lower that we could do beyond just college enrollment, and FAFSA was one of our answers. So we started reporting out to schools annually, and again, these are just snapshots. They're actually kind of old. You'll see some really good, relevant, new ones in this in that pamphlet on the left-hand part of your folder. But reporting annually just isn't enough when you're really trying to move the needle. So that is what caused us to go out and find FAFSA data. It was, again, it was not easy, but it's what was needed because we needed something that we could report regularly in real time and not just know at the end of the year what happened and then spend the next year guessing and a whole different series of supports and hope it worked. So we got FAFSA data, we turned it into a web-based, real-time reporting system. Counselors could go in every day and find out if their students had completed the FAFSA or not. If the workshop they did 2 weeks ago, those students showed up as a yes or a no, and if they showed up as a no, they started digging into why. I'm sure each one of you who has done this already will relate, and those of you who haven't will relate come January. When you get a no and you think it should be a yes, you just want to scream. And you're a data person, you probably get screamed at. And so, no, they completed it. And you go through a series of kind of inquiry to figure out what's going on. And in our first year, we've discovered the 3 or 4 common things that was happening in Chicago that that was causing the no's. So a common one that we hit was they completed it with the parents, but the parent still needed to send in their signature page. Counselors assumed it was signed and sent in. It wasn't. So just, even though we didn't know the why or the no, why the no was still there, it caused that conversation to happen, and those conversations weren't happening before. As it was said this morning, every district, every school is unique. This is correct. I don't think anybody would ever say one is like another. I'm just going to encourage you, as you think about this, maybe web-based reporting isn't right for you. Maybe there are other ways that it's going to work within your community. But you really need to think about who's using the data. If it's your teachers and counselors, if you need to provide out to district leadership as well, are there ways you're going to engage your external service providers? I'm guessing with FERPA still that they can't get the data directly, but there are ways to engage them, and you need to think about who this community is that's using it, and then how you're going to be reporting it. So ideas that are out there, examples that are in that very nice manual in your folder, are you could do daily web-based reporting if that's feasible, weekly comparison reports, just so your schools can see where they were last week compared to where they are this week, and how they compare to all the other schools in their district as well. We used weekly emails from the superintendent to congratulate those who had really big improvements from the week before. And then tying it to that bigger picture. So year-end reports, trend reports, and then crossing your FAFSA data with other data like college enrollment. So as you're thinking about this, what matters most depends on the context, depends on who's asking the question, what data they need. I would just encourage you to measure what you can change, focus on a few data points at a time, and focus on progress. And measuring what you can change, measure what you want to change, make sure you have that buy-in and you're focusing on the right pieces of data. I'm going to just zoom through this because there are other examples. These are just some of the metrics that worked for CPS, probably pretty similar to what you guys are doing as well. And then get back to this bigger picture. So from a district lens, you may be thinking, how do I think about this in relation to the students that are participating in a career or early awareness activity? So that's that middle grades, 9th, 10th grade, to prepare them till they get to their junior, senior year. We're talking about FAFSA, what are they doing before? Thinking about FAFSA, what % of students qualified, am I saying a word there? Qualified for grants programs, qualified to apply. Sorry, it's missing a word and I actually don't know where it's missing. So % of students planning to attend post-secondary educational institutions, and what do we know about them? Did they apply for the FAFSA, did they didn't? Or % of students with a career plan. Just thinking of these other concrete pieces that you can then match. So it's not just about doing the FAFSA, not doing the FAFSA. What more can we be talking about? And we are actually going to skip questions. I'm going to make sure Ed and Marcia both have a chance to talk, and then we'll do questions for all of us at the end. So I'm going to hand it over to Ed now, so we can keep moving.